The fire had stolen her beauty, but it couldn't touch her soul, though no one in Mercy Ridge seemed to notice the difference. Livia Whitmore pressed her palm against the cool glass of Henderson's General Store, watching the townsfolk hurry past without so much as a glance in her direction. 3 years had passed since the blaze that claimed her family's homestead and left intricate scars dancing across the left side of her face like frozen lightning. 3 years since Memphis Kerrigan, her childhood sweetheart, had taken one look at her bandaged visage and declared their engagement, a mistake born of youthful foolishness. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street, and somewhere in those shadows lived the woman she used to be, the belle of Mercy Ridge, sought after by every eligible bachelor from here to Tombstone. Now she existed in the spaces between conversations, in the awkward silences that followed her entrance to any room. "Mornin', Miss Whitmore." The voice, low and honeyed with a trace of Texas drawl, made her turn. Hendrix Barron stood in the doorway of the store, his hat respectfully removed, dark hair catching the light. She'd noticed him around town these past weeks, a drifter who'd taken work at the Connors Ranch, different from the others somehow. His eyes held no pity when they looked at her, no uncomfortable darting away from her scars. "Mr. Barron." She nodded, surprised by his direct address. Most folks either ignored her completely or spoke about her as if she weren't standing right there. "Mighty fine morning for a ride, don't you reckon?" He gestured toward the open plains beyond town. Country's showing off something fierce with all that spring green. Livia's throat constricted. When had anyone last invited her anywhere? "Aye, that's kind of you, but nothing." His smile was crooked, genuine. Every living soul deserves to feel the wind in their hair now and again. "Besides, I could use the company. Gets lonesome, talking to cattle all day. You can almost smell the dust and possibility hanging in the air between them, thick as summer honey." Livia found herself studying his face, weathered by sun and work, marked by a thin scar along his jaw that spoke of its own stories. Here was a man acquainted with pain, she realized. Perhaps that's why he looked at her like she was still whole. "I haven't ridden in." She paused, remembering Memphis's words after the fire. "A lady in your condition shouldn't draw attention." To herself, "Time's got a way of healing wounds we didn't think would mend," Hendrix said quietly. "Sometimes it just needs a little encouragement." Before she could protest further, he was walking toward the hitching post where 2 horses waited. A sturdy bay gelding and a gentle-looking paint mare. Borrowed Sky from the Davison spread. "She's got the sweetest temperament this side of heaven." The paint mare nickered softly as Livia approached, and something inside her chest, something she'd thought died in the flames, flickered to life. Her hand found the mare's neck, fingers remembering the familiar warmth of horsehair, the solid comfort of a living creature who didn't judge by appearances. "I don't have proper riding attire," she whispered. But even as she spoke, she was calculating how long it had been since she'd felt truly alive. "Reckon the horses won't mind." Hendrix's eyes twinkled. "They're more interested in good company than fashion." As she lifted her foot toward the stirrup, Livia caught sight of herself in the store window. Scarred, yes, but with color in her cheeks for the first time in months. The woman looking back at her wasn't the broken creature she'd believed herself to be. She was someone preparing for an adventure. They rode in comfortable silence at first, the morning air crisp with the promise of warmer days ahead. Hendrix kept his mount at her pace, never pushing, never presuming. The town fell away behind them, until Mercy Ridge was just a smudge on the horizon, and Livia felt something loosening in her chest, the tight knot of shame and self-consciousness she'd carried like a stone. "Tell me about the fire," he said eventually, and she tensed. But his voice held no morbid curiosity, only gentle interest. "If you've a mind to, that is." "What?" The word came out sharper than intended. "Because carrying secrets is like carrying water in a broken bucket. Eventually, you've got to set it down." The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden grass rippling like waves. In this vastness, her story felt smaller somehow, less consuming. It was harvest time. Pa had brought in extra hands, and they were careless with the lanterns in the barn. By the time we smelled smoke, she trailed off, but Hendrix waited with the patience of a man who understood that some stories needed to be coaxed like wild horses. "Ma and Pa didn't make it out. I tried to save them, but a beam fell, pinned me down. That's where these came from." She touched her scars without flinching, the first time she'd done so in front of another person. Marks of courage, he said. Simply, most folks run from fire. You ran toward it. The words hit her like cool water on parched earth. Courage. When had anyone called her courageous? Memphis, my fiancé, he said they made me unmarriageable. Said no man would want a woman. So marked. Hendricks reined in his horse abruptly, and she did the same, turning to face him. His jaw was tight, eyes flashing with something that might have been anger. That man's a fool, he said, voice rough as sandpaper. And a coward to boot. You don't understand. Before the fire, I was beautiful. He dismounted, ground tying his horse before walking to her side. Miss Whitmore, beauty that runs skin deep ain't worth the powder to blow it to hell. His hands were steady as he helped her down, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Close enough to notice the way he looked at her, not with pity or avoidance, but with something that made her pulse quicken. I see a woman who fought fire and lived to tell about it, he continued. I see someone who lost everything and kept standing. That's the kind of beautiful that matters. The wind stirred the grass around them, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, and Livia felt as if she were waking from a long, dreamless sleep. But as they prepared to mount again, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, riders approaching fast. Hendricks's hand moved instinctively to his gun belt, his easy manner shifting to something harder, more watchful. Company coming, he murmured, and there was something in his voice that made her stomach clench with sudden fear. But who were these riders, and why did their approach make a simple cowboy reach for his weapon? The riders crested the hill like thunder given form. 5 men on horseback, led by a figure Livia recognized with a sinking heart. Memphis Kerrigan sat his stallion, with the arrogance of a man who'd never known real hardship, his golden hair gleaming in the morning sun like a crown he'd never earned. Well, Memphis called out as he reined in his mount 20 yards away. Look what the cat dragged out of hiding. Behind him rode Tate Connors, the ranch owner's son whose cruel tongue was legend throughout the territory. Beside Tate sat Cairo Pierce, a gambler with dead eyes and quick hands, flanked by 2 drifters Livia didn't recognize, hard men with the look of trouble about them. Hendricks stepped slightly in front of Livia, a movement so subtle it might have been coincidence. But his hand rested easy near his gun, and his voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to danger. Gentlemen, he said, touching the brim of his hat. Fine morning for a ride. Memphis ignored him entirely, his pale blue eyes fixed on Livia with something that might have been disgust. Livia, darling, what are you doing out here with the hired help? Surely you haven't fallen so far that you're keeping company with drifters. The words hit like a physical blow, but Hendricks's presence beside her was solid as bedrock. She lifted her chin, feeling strength flow through her veins like molten steel. I'm enjoying the morning air, Memphis. Not that it's any concern of yours. Everything that happens in this territory concerns me, he replied, dismounting with theatrical flourish. Especially when it involves former acquaintances making spectacles of themselves. Tate Connors snickered from his saddle. Hell, Memphis, I thought you said she'd learned to keep to the shadows where she belongs. Looks like the hired man here needs to learn some manners about what's proper. You can almost taste the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Hendricks's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his voice remained level as still water. Seems to me the only thing improper here is grown men bothering a lady who's done nothing but enjoy God's creation. Cairo Pierce shifted in his saddle, cards appearing in his hands as if by magic, a nervous habit that made smart men keep their distance. That's a mighty bold tone for a saddle tramp, friend. You sure you want to be taking that line? I'm sure about what's right and what's wrong, Hendricks replied. Question is, are you gentlemen? Memphis laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right and wrong. That's rich, coming from a man who doesn't know his place. Let me educate you about how things work in Mercy Ridge. He approached Livia with the confident stride of a man who'd never been refused anything. When he reached for her arm, she jerked away, but he caught her wrist anyway, his grip tighter than necessary. You were mine once, Livia. Beautiful, pristine, perfect. Look at you now, damaged goods trying to play at being whole again. The cruelty in his voice made something snap inside her. 3 years of shame and hiding crystallized into pure, bright anger. I was never yours, Memphis Kerrigan. You made that clear the moment you saw my scars and decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. Because you're not. The mask of civility slipped completely. You're a reminder of everything ugly and broken. In this world, did you think parading around with some nobody cowboy would change that? Before she could respond, Hendricks moved. One moment Memphis was gripping her wrist. The next he was staggering backward, nursing a jaw that would sport impressive bruises come evening. That's enough, Hendricks said quietly, but his voice carried the promise of violence barely held in. Check. The ladies made her feelings clear. Time for you boys to move along. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Cairo's cards had vanished, replaced by the gleam of steel partially drawn from leather. Tate's hand hovered near his gun, grinning like a wolf scenting blood. The two nameless drifters spread out slightly, experienced in the choreography of violence. Memphis spat blood into the dust, his eyes blazing with humiliated fury. You just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life, cowboy. Maybe, Hendricks agreed. But I can live with defending a lady's honor. Can you live with what? You just did. It was then that Livia noticed something she'd missed before. The way Hendricks carried himself, the practiced ease with which he'd moved, the subtle signs of a man who'd seen more than his share of trouble. This wasn't just some drifting ranch hand. There were stories written in the set of his shoulders, secrets hidden in the calm steadiness of his gaze. Who are you really? Memphis demanded, as if reading her thoughts. No ordinary cowpoke moves like that. Hendricks's smile was winter cold. Just a man who knows right from wrong, friend. That seemed foreign to you. Tate Connors had heard enough. His gun cleared leather with practiced speed, but Hendricks was faster, not by much, but enough. The sharp crack of gunfire split the morning air, and Tate's weapon went spinning into the grass, taking 2 of his fingers with it. Jesus! Tate screamed, clutching his mangled hand. He shot me. The bastard shot me. Winged you. Hendricks corrected mildly, though his own Colt remained steady in his grip. Next man who draws iron gets worse. Cairo Pierce had gone statue still, his gambler's instincts telling him he was outclassed. The two drifters looked to Memphis for guidance, but their leader was staring at Hendricks with dawning recognition. I know you, Memphis whispered. You're Hendricks Barron. The Hendricks Barron. The name hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Livia felt the ground shift beneath her feet as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began clicking into place. She'd heard whispers of that name in saloons and general stores, a gunfighter of legendary skill who'd disappeared from the circuit years ago. Hendricks said simply. Now I'm just a man trying to live quiet. Quiet. Memphis's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You think you can just ride into my territory, court my cast-offs, and expect to live quiet? She's not your anything, Hendricks replied, and there was finality in his voice like a coffin lid closing. And this isn't your territory. It's God's country, open to anyone decent enough to appreciate it. Memphis remounted his horse with stiff dignity, cradling his bruised jaw. This isn't over, Baron. Not by a long shot. No, Hendricks agreed, holstering his weapon with fluid grace. I don't reckon it is. As the riders disappeared over the ridge, trailing dust and wounded pride, Livia found herself staring at the man beside her as if seeing him for the first time. The gentle cowboy who'd invited her riding was still there, but now she glimpsed the steel beneath the velvet, the dangerous past he'd tried to leave behind. A gunfighter, she said softly. You're a gunfighter. Hendricks's shoulders sagged slightly, as if a weight had settled on them. Was trying real hard not to be anymore. But in a territory where violence was currency and reputation was armor, could a man like Hendricks Barron ever truly escape his past? The silence that followed Memphis's departure stretched between them like a chasm. Hendricks stood motionless, staring at the horizon where dust still marked their enemy's retreat, his face carved from stone. The gentle cowboy who'd invited her riding had vanished, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, someone who'd just shot a man's fingers off with casual precision. How many? Livia asked quietly. Ma'am, how many men have you killed? His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn to face her. More than I care to count. Fewer than folks claim. The wind stirred the grass around them, carrying the metallic scent of spilled blood and the bitter smoke of gunpowder. You can almost feel the weight of unspoken histories settling over the prairie like gathering storm clouds. That's why you left the circuit, she continued, pieces falling into place. You got tired of the killing, got tired of being expected to kill. He finally turned, and she saw something raw in his eyes, pain that matched her own, different in origin but identical in depth. Every town, someone wanting to make their reputation by putting down Hendrix Barron. Every saloon, some fool kid thinking he could outdraw the legend. After a while, you realize the only way to stop being a killer is to stop giving folks reason to die. So you became a ranch hand. Tried to. His laugh held no humor. Seems the past has other ideas. They rode back toward town in contemplative quiet. But the easy companionship of the morning had shifted into something deeper, more complex. Livia found herself studying his profile. The strong jaw, the weathered hands steady on the reins, the way he held himself with unconscious readiness. This was a man who'd lived on the knife's edge of violence for so long that peace sat uneasily on his shoulders. They'll come back, she said as the outskirts of Mercy Ridge appeared ahead. I know, with more men. Memphis doesn't forgive slights, and his pride's been wounded worse than Tate's hand. I know that too. She pulled up short, forcing him to do the same. Then why? Why defend me when you knew it would mean trouble? Hendrix studied her face for a long moment, his gaze lingering on her scars with something that wasn't pity or revulsion, but recognition, one wounded soul acknowledging another. Because some things are worth fighting for, he said simply. And some fights choose you, whether you want them or not. As they entered town, Livia became acutely aware of the stairs following them. Word traveled fast in a place like Mercy Ridge, and she could practically hear the whispers starting. The scarred woman and the notorious gunfighter, riding together like they had every right. By evening, every tongue in the territory would be wagging to A.T. Henderson's general store. Old Ezra Henderson himself came out to greet them, his weathered face creased with concern. Miss Whitmore, heard there was some trouble out on the range. Nothing we couldn't handle, Mr. Henderson, she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Ezra's knowing eyes shifted to Hendrix. Figured as much. Word is Memphis Kerrigan's been seen riding hard toward his daddy's spread, nursing a sore jaw and wounded pride. Tate Connors is at Doc Sullivan's, getting his hand tended. Unfortunate accident, Hendrix said mildly. I'm sure. It was. Ezra's grin was wolfish. Funny how accidents seem to happen around men who don't know how to treat ladies proper. As Hendrix helped her down from Sky's back, Livia caught sight of a familiar figure watching from across the street. Brielle Madison stood in the doorway of her dress shop, her perfect features twisted with something that might have been envy. Behind her lurked Selah Townsend and Enzo Wyatt, members of Memphis's inner circle, their expressions calculating. We're being watched, she murmured. Always are, in a town this size. Hendrix handed Sky's reins to the stable boy who'd appeared at their approach. Question is whether they're brave enough to do something about it. That question was answered sooner than expected. As they walked toward the boarding house where Livia kept her modest room, a shadow detached itself from the alley between Murphy's saloon and the barber shop. The figure stepped into the street with deliberate purpose, a tall, lean man in a black duster, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. Hendrix Barron, the stranger called out, his voice carrying the distinctive rasp of too much whiskey. And tobacco. Been looking for you. The blood drained from Livia's face as she recognized the voice. Everyone in the territory knew that particular combination of menace and confidence. This was Dalton Reed, a bounty hunter with a reputation for bringing in his quarries dead more often than alive. Hendrix's posture shifted subtly, his hand drifting toward his gun belt. Dalton, should have known you'd show up eventually. $500, dead or alive. Posted by the family of Jake Morrison, down in Tucson. Seems they take exception to you putting their boy in the ground. Jake Morrison drew first. Had witnesses. Don't matter to his grieving mama. Dalton's coat fell open, revealing the pearl handles of matched Colts. She wants justice, and she's got the money to buy it. The street began to empty as word spread with the supernatural speed of frontier gossip. Shopkeepers pulled down their shutters, children were hustled indoors, and horses shied nervously at their hitching posts. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for death to announce itself with thunder and smoke. This doesn't concern the lady, Hendricks said quietly. Let her go inside. Afraid it does concern her now. Dalton's smile was cold as January wind. Word as you've taken. A shine to the local charity case. Makes her what web professionals call leverage. Rage flared in Hendricks's eyes, but his voice remained level. You always were a coward, Dalton. Hiding behind women and children when the odds weren't in your favor. I hide behind whatever works. And right now, what works is making sure you don't have any reason to run. Livia felt the familiar weight of being used as a pawn in someone else's game, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't helpless. Moving with the quick grace of someone who'd grown up on horseback, she stepped deliberately between the two men. Mr. Reed, she said, her voice carrying across the empty street like a bell. I believe you're mistaken about my relationship with Mr. Barron. Both men stared at her as if she'd sprouted wings. We only met this morning, she continued, the lie flowing smooth as honey. He was kind enough to escort me on a ride, nothing more. Surely even a man of your reputation wouldn't murder someone over such a brief acquaintance. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Lady, you'd best step aside before. Before what? The voice came from behind them, cold and sharp as winter steel. Before, you threatened an innocent woman in my town. Sheriff Marcus Cole stepped into the street, his badge catching the afternoon sun like a star. Behind him walked his deputy, a mountain of a man named Bear Johnson, whose reputation with a shotgun was legendary throughout the territory. But as the four armed men faced each other in the dusty street, Livia realized she'd just set in motion events that would change everything. And there was no taking back the words that might save Hendricks's life or seal all their fates. The tension in the street stretched taut as piano wire, for armed men calculating angles and advantages while the entire town watched from behind shuttered windows. Sheriff Cole's weathered face revealed nothing, but his hand rested easy on his gun, but a man comfortable with violence when necessity demanded it. Now then, Dalton, the sheriff said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than impending bloodshed. Last I checked, bounty hunting wasn't legal within Mercy Ridge city limits. Legal or not, Sheriff, I've got a job to do. Dalton's eyes never left Hendricks. Jake Morrison's family wants justice, and I aim to provide it. Jake Morrison was a back-shooting coward who got what he deserved, Deputy Johnson rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. I was there when it happened. Fair fight, witnessed by a dozen men. You can almost taste the sulfur in the air, thick as the moment before lightning strikes. Livia stood frozen between them all, acutely aware that her impulsive lie had transformed a simple bounty collection into something far more complex and deadly. That's when the sound of hoofbeats announced new arrivals. Memphis Kerrigan rode into town at the head of 20 armed men, ranch hands, drifters, and hired guns drawn by the promise of violence and coin. His jaw bore purple bruises from Hendricks's fist, but his eyes blazed with the fever of wounded pride. Well now, Memphis called out, reining in his mount with theatrical flourish. Looks like we've got ourselves a regular convention of killers and lawmen. Sheriff Cole's jaw tightened. Memphis, you'd best take your boys and ride on. This isn't your concern. Oh, but it is, Sheriff. See, this gunfighter here assaulted me and maimed one of my men. That makes it very much my concern. Dalton Reed chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. Seems our Mr. Barron's made quite a collection of enemies. Makes my job that much easier. Your job, Sheriff Cole said quietly, ends at the city limits. And Memphis, if you think I'll let you turn my town into a shooting gallery, you're sorely mistaken. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, casting sharp shadows that seemed to carve the street into sections of light and dark. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, each note hanging in the still air like a funeral dirge. It was then that Livia noticed movement in the upper windows of the buildings surrounding them. Rifle barrels glinted in the shadows. Memphis's men had positioned themselves with overlapping fields of fire. The street had become a killing ground, and they were all trapped in the center of it. Hendricks, she whispered urgently. I see them, he replied without moving his lips. His stance remained casual, but she could feel the coiled tension in him like a spring wound to breaking. Memphis dismounted with the confidence of a man holding all the cards. Here's how this works, Sheriff. You and your deputy step aside. Let Mr. Reed and myself settle our business with Barron, and nobody else has to die today. Can't do that, Memphis. Won't do that. Then I'm afraid you've chosen poorly. The signal was subtle, just a slight nod of Memphis's head, but Hendricks caught it. His Colt appeared in his hand with lightning speed, the first shot taking out the rifleman in Murphy's saloon before the man could draw proper aim. Sheriff Cole and Deputy Johnson moved simultaneously, their weapons clearing leather as all hell broke loose. The street erupted in thunder and flame. Livia dove for the cover of a horse trough as bullets whined overhead like angry hornets. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the copper scent of blood and the screams of wounded men. Through the chaos, she watched Hendricks move like death incarnate. Fluid, precise, unstoppable. His gun spoke with deadly authority, each shot finding its mark with mechanical precision. This was no longer the gentle cowboy who'd invited her riding. This was the legendary gunfighter whose reputation had been forged in a dozen frontier towns. Sheriff Cole fought with the grim determination of a man defending his home, his rifle barking steadily as he picked off Memphis's riflemen from their perches. Deputy Johnson's shotgun roared like cannon fire, clearing the street of anyone foolish enough to stand in the open. But Dalton Reed was the most dangerous of them all. The bounty hunter moved through the carnage like a ghost, his matched Colts weaving patterns of death as he closed the distance to his target. Bodies fell around him, but he seemed untouchable, protected by skill and the devil's own luck. "Barron," he called out over the gunfire. "Time to pay for Jake Morrison." Hendricks spun to face him, both men firing simultaneously. The reports came so close together they sounded like a single massive explosion. Dalton stumbled, red blooming, across his black duster, but his guns never wavered. It was then that Livia saw Memphis moving through the smoke, a hideout gun in his hand, creeping toward Hendricks's blind spot. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen rifle and stepped into the open. "Behind you!" she screamed. Hendricks turned just as Memphis fired, the bullet meant for his heart instead creasing his shoulder. But the distraction cost him. Dalton's second shot took him in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees in the dust. "No!" The scream tore from Livia's throat as she brought the rifle to her shoulder. She'd learned to shoot defending the homestead from raiders and wolves, but she'd never aimed at a human being. The rifle bucked in her hands, and Dalton Reed pitched backward into the street. His bounty hunting days forever ended. The gunfire gradually died away as Memphis's surviving men realized their cause was lost. Those who could still walk threw down their weapons and raised their hands, while the wounded called out for mercy or water. The street looked like a battlefield, littered with bodies and stained with blood. Sheriff Cole emerged from cover, his left arm hanging useless at his side, but his eyes still sharp and alert. "It's over," he called out. "Drop your weapons and surrender, or I'll finish what we started." Memphis Kerrigan lay groaning in the dust, his perfect golden hair matted with dirt and blood. The hideout gun had been shot from his hand, taking 2 fingers with it. His dreams of revenge had died with his hired army. Livia ran to where Hendricks had fallen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. He was still breathing, but blood soaked the front of his shirt, spreading with each labored breath. "Don't you dare die on me, Hendricks Barron," she whispered fiercely, pressing her hands against the wound. "Not after everything we've been through." His eyes found hers, pain and something deeper shining in their depths. "Livia, I'm sorry. Sorry you had to see this. Sorry I brought this down on you. Hush now. Save your strength." But as Doc Sullivan came running with his medical bag and the wounded were carried away, Livia couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Not for territory or revenge, but for the soul of a man trying to escape his past. 3 Weeks had passed since the gunfight that transformed Main Street into a battlefield and forever changed the soul of Mercy Ridge. The bloodstains had been scrubbed away by summer rains, but the memory lingered in every conversation, every sideways glance, every whispered story told in the safety of familiar parlors. Livia sat beside Hendricks's bed in Doc Sullivan's back room, her fingers working steadily at the embroidery hoop. In her lap, a habit she'd taken up during the long hours of his recovery. The needle moved with practiced precision, creating delicate wildflowers across pristine white cloth, each stitch a prayer for healing, each bloom a promise of hope. "You don't have to stay," Hendricks said quietly, his voice still weak but growing. "Stronger each day. Folks are talking. Let them talk." She didn't look up from her needlework. "I've been the subject of gossip before. Survived it then, I'll survive it now." Through the window came the sounds of a town slowly returning to normal. Children playing in the street, hammers ringing as shopkeepers repaired bullet holes, the steady clip-clop of horses carrying merchants about their business. Life, it seemed, had a way of flowing around tragedy like water around stones. The door opened to admit Sheriff Cole, his left arm still bound in a sling, but his eyes bright with satisfaction. Behind him walked a distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit, someone clearly not from these parts. "Hendricks, Miss Whitmore," the sheriff nodded. "Like you to meet Judge Harrison from the territorial capital. He's here about the Memphis situation." Judge Harrison removed his hat with courtly grace, revealing silver hair and intelligent eyes. "Mr. Barron, I've come to personally thank you for your service to this community. The evidence against Memphis Kerrigan and his associates was extensive, just doing what needed doing, Your Honor." "Indeed. Which is why I'm pleased to inform you that all outstanding warrants for your arrest have been officially dismissed. It seems the territorial governor has decided that a man who defends innocent citizens against organized crime deserves a clean slate." The words hung in the air like church bells on Sunday morning. Livia's embroidery needle stilled in her fingers. As the full meaning penetrated, free. Hendricks was truly free. "There's more," Judge Harrison continued. "The town council has voted to offer you the position of deputy sheriff, permanent-like. Sheriff Cole speaks highly of your character and abilities." Hendricks struggled to sit up straighter, wincing at the pull of healing muscle. "Judge, I appreciate the offer, but before you refuse," Sheriff Cole interrupted, "hear me out. This town needs men who understand the difference between justice and vengeance. You've proven you can walk that line." Livia set aside her needlework and moved to the window, ostensibly to adjust the curtains, but really to hide the sudden brightness in her eyes. A permanent position meant staying. Staying meant possibilities she hardly dared imagine. After the officials departed, silence settled over the room like dust after a windstorm. Hendricks watched her carefully, reading the tension in her shoulders, the careful control in her movements. "You think I should take it," he said finally. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy." She turned from the window, meeting his gaze directly. "What would make you happy, Hendricks?" The question hung between them, loaded with 3 weeks' worth of unspoken words, of careful conversations that danced around the truth both were afraid to voice. Outside, the evening star was appearing in the darkening sky, bright and steady as a promise. "You want the honest answer?" "Always. What would make me happy is waking up every morning knowing I've got reason to be a better man than I was the day before. What would make me happy is building something instead of tearing it down. What would make me happy is," he paused, gathering courage like a man about to leap across a canyon. "What would make me happy is spending whatever years the good Lord grants me proving to one particular lady that scars don't define a person's worth." You can almost hear the sound of walls crumbling, of defenses carefully constructed over years of pain finally being allowed to fall. Livia felt tears threatening, not the bitter tears of grief she'd shed so often, but something altogether different. "That particular lady," she said softly, "might be interested in such an arrangement, provided, of course, that the gentleman in question understands she's not looking for someone to rescue her. Wouldn't dream of it. From what I've seen, she's perfectly capable of doing her own rescuing. Might even rescue a worn-out gunfighter in the process." She moved to his bedside, her hand finding his with the natural ease of water finding its level. His fingers closed around hers, calloused from honest work, steady as mountain stone, warm as summer sunlight. "The whole town's watching," she warned. "If we do this, there'll be no hiding, no pretending it's something other than what it is." "Good. I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending to be less than I am because other folks are uncomfortable with truth." A knock at the door interrupted them. Doc Sullivan peered in, his weathered face creased with the closest thing to a smile anyone had seen from him in months. "Hate to interrupt, but there's a crowd gathering outside." Seems the whole town wants to congratulate our hero on his recovery and other recent developments. Through the window, they could see faces pressed against the glass. Ezra Henderson grinning like a proud father, Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, even some of the saloon girls waving enthusiastically. The entire population of Mercy Ridge, it seemed, had decided to adopt their unlikely romance as a cause for celebration. What do you say, Miss Whitmore? Hendricks squeezed her hand gently. Ready to face the music? With you? I'm ready for anything. 6 months later, as autumn painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Deputy Sheriff Hendricks Barron stood before the altar of Mercy Ridge's small church, watching his bride walk down the aisle. Livia wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to accommodate the changes 3 years of grief and healing had wrought. Her scars caught the light filtering through stained glass windows, but she wore them like badges of honor now, proof of battles fought and survived. The church was packed beyond capacity, the entire town having turned out to witness what many were calling the wedding of the century. Even the preacher seemed moved by the occasion, his usually stern voice gentle as he spoke of love conquering all, of beauty that runs deeper than skin, of second chances granted by divine grace that they exchanged vows. Livia's garden, planted behind the house they'd built together, bloomed in defiant celebration. Roses climbed the fence posts in wild profusion, their thorns and beauty intertwined in perfect harmony, just like the couple who tended them. In the end, the fire had taken much from Livia Whitmore, but it had also led her to a love that burned, brighter than any flame, steady, enduring, and beautiful beyond measure. Well now, if that don't warm your heart like a good cup of coffee on a cold morning, I don't know what will. If you enjoyed this tale of love found in the most unlikely places, be sure to give it a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what other stories you'd like to hear from the frontier. Speaking of which, drop us a line and tell us where you're watching from today. We love hearing from folks all across this great big world of ours.